I will never forget the day I married Daniel. Not because of the flowers, the music, or even the vows. What etched that day into my memory forever wasn't love. It was humiliation. The reception hall glowed with laughter and clinking glasses. Guests swirled on the dance floor, the air thick with perfume, champagne, and the buzz of celebration. I stood off to the side for a moment, catching my breath when I heard her voice. My new mother-in-law, Margaret. She didn't see me standing just beyond the curtain near the catering table. She was leaning in close to one of her friends, her voice low but sharp as glass. "She'll be the servant in my house," Margaret said with a chuckle, tilting her glass of wine. "Mark my words. She doesn't have money, she doesn't have connections, and she certainly doesn't have the spine. Daniel is soft, she'll cook, clean, and bend to me. That's how it will be." The friend laughed, clinking glasses with her. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I had misheard. But the words repeated in my head, clear and cruel. "She'll be the servant in my house." That was how Margaret saw me. Not as her son's wife. Not as family. But as labor. I swallowed hard, smoothed my dress, and walked back into the hall with a practiced smile. I didn't tell Daniel, not then. He was too happy, glowing with pride, and I wouldn't ruin it. But in my heart something shifted. A vow formed silently, deeper than the one I had just spoken at the altar. I will never let her break me. I will never be what she thinks I am. Life after the wedding wasn't easy. Daniel and I moved into a small apartment downtown. He worked long hours at the bank, and I balanced part-time jobs while studying for certifications in business management. But Margaret's presence loomed. She visited often, always unannounced, her eyes scanning the apartment like a general inspecting barracks. "Daniel, really? She has you living here? This is hardly fitting for my son," she would sniff, arms folded. Or, with a pointed glance at me, "Have you learned how Daniel likes his shirts pressed yet? A wife should know these things." Every comment was a cut disguised as advice. She reminded me constantly that in her eyes I was unworthy. But I bit my tongue. I smiled. I endured. Not because I was weak, but because I was building. Quietly, steadily, I was working toward something bigger. One evening, Margaret invited us to her home for dinner. Her house was everything ours wasn't. Sprawling, polished, filled with antiques and the scent of money. Halfway through the meal, she leaned back, sipping her wine, and made her declaration in front of everyone. "Well, I suppose we'll see how long this lasts," she said casually. "Marriage is work. And in this one we all know who will be doing the work. Don't we?" Her eyes flicked to me, lips curling in a smile that wasn't a smile at all. The table went quiet. Daniel froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Heat rose in my chest, but I said nothing. Not then. I only lifted my glass, met her eyes, and drank in silence. Inside, though, the vow I had made at the wedding flared again, brighter than ever. "Someday, Margaret. Someday you'll see." What Margaret never noticed, because she never cared to look, was how hard I worked behind the scenes. While she mocked me, I was grinding through long nights of study, certification courses, and freelance work. I had always loved business, strategy, the puzzle of making something out of nothing. And slowly, piece by piece, opportunities opened. Daniel supported me as best he could, but even he didn't fully understand the fire Margaret had lit in me. Every jab she made, every insult, every smug remark only fueled my determination. By year 3 of our marriage, I had landed a management role at a growing startup. By year 4, I was leading entire projects, bringing in clients, shaping the company's growth. Margaret, meanwhile, still saw me as the girl in the small apartment. She had no idea how far things were shifting. And I kept it that way. On the 5th anniversary of our wedding, Daniel surprised me with dinner at a rooftop restaurant. As we clinked glasses, he smiled and said, "Do you realize how far we've come? We're not struggling anymore. You've built something incredible." I smiled, but my thoughts flickered back to that wedding day. To Margaret's promise. To her cruel, careless words. I didn't tell Daniel, not yet. I didn't need to. Because the pieces were almost in place. And soon, very soon, Margaret's world would collide with mine in a way she never could have imagined. Margaret always underestimated me. That was her first mistake. To her, I was still that young woman she sneered at on my wedding day. The one she had already decided would iron her son's shirts and take her orders like a maid. What she didn't see, because arrogance had blinded her, was that I was no longer struggling. I was building an empire. By the 5th year of my marriage, I was no longer just an employee. I was a strategist someone executives turned to when they wanted growth. The startup I had joined was expanding fast and I was rising with it. Promotions came, bigger projects, more influence. And yet, to Margaret, I was still just Daniel's wife. That was fine with me. In fact, it was perfect. Because she never saw the change coming. One Saturday evening, Daniel and I went to dinner at Margaret's house. She had set the table with her usual flair, crystal glasses, polished silverware, candlelight flickering against portraits of stern-looking ancestors on the walls. As soon as I walked in, she began her routine. "Ah, there she is," Margaret said, her lips twisting into something that was not quite a smile. "Still wearing bargain dresses, I see. Daniel, you should really tell her you can afford to dress her better." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, that's not." I put a hand on his arm and smiled. "It's fine." But inside it wasn't fine. Not because I cared about what she thought of my clothes, I didn't. But because I knew she was still clinging to her illusion of control. And I let her. Through the meal she carried on. "Marriage is about knowing your place," she said, cutting her steak with delicate precision. "A wife should serve her husband and his family. That's tradition. That's respect. But perhaps I'm old-fashioned." Her eyes flicked to me, daring me to bite back. I didn't. I sipped my wine and let her bask in her fantasy. Because I knew something she didn't. The company I worked for was about to expand into new markets. And the position I had just been offered, quietly, confidentially, would put me in charge of operations for an entire division. A leadership role with more power than she could comprehend. So I let her laugh. I let her mock. I let her believe I was beneath her. Her arrogance was digging her own grave. What Margaret never saw were the nights I stayed up past midnight, my desk lamp burning as I pored over reports, strategies, and client presentations. Daniel would fall asleep on the couch sometimes, waiting for me to finish. He supported me, though I knew it stung him at times to see how much I was consumed by ambition. "You work harder than anyone I know," he said one night, rubbing his eyes as I typed furiously. "I just don't want you to burn out." I smiled at him, reached for his hand and said, "I won't. I know what I'm doing." What I didn't say was the truth that sat heavy in my chest. I can't stop. Not yet. Not until I prove her wrong. Not until I stand so high she has no choice but to look up at me. Every insult, every sneer, every mocking word Margaret had ever thrown at me fueled me like gasoline poured on fire. And slowly, quietly, the fire was spreading. She carried on as if nothing had changed. At gatherings, she would make small comments in front of relatives. "Well, Daniel works so hard at the bank. I don't know how he manages with, well, you know." Her eyes would drift to me, a smirk tugging her lips. Or she would pull me aside in the kitchen. "Don't get too comfortable," she would whisper. "Marriages shift. Daniel will always be my son first." I learned to nod, to smile, to let the words roll off my back. Outwardly, I gave her nothing. Inwardly, I stored every word like ammunition. What she didn't realize was that I was not only outgrowing her insults, I was outgrowing her entire world. Because while she spent her afternoons gossiping over tea with her friends, I was learning to lead teams, to negotiate with CEOs, to make decisions that moved millions of dollars. She lived in a bubble of status. I was learning how to control power. It was at a charity gala that the shift became undeniable. Daniel and I attended on behalf of my company, something Margaret didn't know. She was there too, of course, surrounded by her friends, dripping in jewelry, holding court as if she owned the room. When she spotted us, her face tightened. "Oh, you're here," she said, her tone just short of disdain. "Daniel, darling, you should have told me." "And you," she looked at me, eyes scanning my dress. "How unexpected." Before I could reply, the CEO of my company, a man Margaret had been trying to meet for months, walked straight over to me. "There you are," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "The woman of the hour. Your strategy on the expansion was brilliant. Couldn't have done it without you." The room around us went quiet for a beat. Margaret's eyes widened, her painted smile faltering. I smiled back at the CEO, gracious, professional. "Thank you. I'm just glad it's working out." When he moved on, I turned back to Margaret. She was frozen, wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. For the first time she looked at me, really looked at me. And for a flicker of a second I saw it. After the gala, Daniel asked if I had noticed his mother's face. "I thought she was going to choke," he laughed. "She had no idea, did she?" I shook my head. know. And she won't know, not fully. Not until it's too late. Because this wasn't about a single gala or one moment of embarrassment. This was about something much bigger. I wasn't just climbing for myself. I was climbing for every insult she had ever thrown at me. For every time she had tried to make me small. And soon, the day would come when she would walk into a room and find me sitting at the head of the table. It was almost poetic the way fate arranged it. My company had recently acquired a struggling business in the same city. It needed restructuring, new leadership, someone with vision. Guess who had been working there for years as a senior advisor? Margaret. She had no idea the company was about to change hands. No idea that her new boss would be me. And I didn't say a word. Because revenge is sweetest when it's silent, until the moment it roars. Margaret had always believed power belonged to her. In her mind, she was the queen of every room she entered. Her opinions were facts, her sneers were truths, her control over her son unshakable. She never considered that the world could shift beneath her, that the daughter-in-law she dismissed as a servant could one day hold her future in her hands. But fate, or perhaps justice, has a way of humbling those who believe they can never fall. The day began like any other for Margaret. She dressed herself in her finest blazer, sprayed on perfume that cost more than most people's rent, and prepared for her new position. The company she had been advising for years had gone through a sudden restructuring. She didn't know the details, only that there was new leadership. Her contacts had assured her that she was safe, that she was too valuable to be removed. As she walked into the office, heels clicking against polished floors, she rehearsed in her mind how she would charm whoever this new leader was. She imagined some faceless executive, someone she could manipulate, someone who would lean on her expertise, and let her continue holding influence. But when she entered the conference room, the world tilted. Because sitting at the head of the table, calm, confident, and waiting, was me. The color drained from her face. For the first time in my life, Margaret was speechless. Her lips parted, her eyes darted from me to the polished wood of the table, to the papers in my hand, as if looking for proof that this was some cruel mistake. "Good morning, everyone," I said smoothly, addressing the room. My voice was steady, professional, the voice of someone who belonged at the top. "As you all know, the company has undergone a significant acquisition. I'll be stepping in as head of operations effective immediately." My eyes flicked to Margaret. I let the silence stretch for a beat too long. "And I look forward to working with all of you." The message was clear. Margaret's hands gripped the edge of her chair as she lowered herself into it, stiff and pale. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The entire room saw it. The shift in power, the new reality. The first weeks were fascinating. Margaret tried everything. She attempted to undermine me in meetings, only to be cut down by my preparation and clarity. She tried to whisper to colleagues in hallways, planting seeds of doubt, but those seeds found no soil, because I had already earned their respect. One afternoon she barged into my office unannounced. "This is humiliating," she hissed. "Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what this looks like?" I set down my pen and leaned back. "Yes, Margaret. It looks like you work for me." Her face flushed crimson. "You think this makes you powerful?" she spat. "You'll always be the girl who married my son. You'll never be more than that." I let her rage. Then I spoke, my voice low, deliberate. "No, Margaret. I'll always be the woman you underestimated. That's the difference." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. The weeks turned to months. And slowly Margaret began to crumble. Her reputation, once her shield, began to fracture. Colleagues whispered, not about me but about her. Her pride, her temper, her inability to accept the new order. Where once she had mocked me, now she avoided me. Where once she had dismissed me, now she was forced to report to me. And every morning, like clockwork, she walked into my office, stiff and brittle, and addressed me with the one word she had never imagined she'd have to use. "Boss." I often thought back to my wedding day. To the hushed, cruel words I had overheard. "She'll be the servant in my house." Margaret had said it with such certainty, such smugness. And now here we were, years later, the roles reversed, the prophecy rewritten. Because life has a way of turning arrogance into ash. I had not shouted at her, not exposed her at family dinners, not sought revenge through insults. I had simply lived, worked, climbed, and waited. And the result was far sweeter than anything I could have planned. It happened one evening after the office had emptied. Margaret lingered in the doorway of my office, her face tired, her eyes hollow. "I don't understand you," she said quietly. "Why didn't you ever fight back? Why didn't you humiliate me like I humiliated you?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Because I didn't need to," I said simply. "You did it to yourself. Every word you spoke, every time you tried to make me small, it only made me work harder. You gave me the fire, Margaret. And now you live with the smoke." Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came. And for the first time in our long, bitter history, she looked not like a queen but like a servant. Revenge is often pictured as loud, shouting, slamming doors, throwing insults like daggers. But real revenge, the kind that lasts, the kind that shakes the earth, is quiet. It's patience. It's building yourself so strong that the person who tried to break you ends up bowing their head when they say your name. On my wedding day, Margaret promised her friend that I would be her servant. 5 years later, she keeps that promise, just not in the way she imagined. And as for me, I never raised my voice, never begged for her respect. I simply lived, worked, and rose. And when the time came, I didn't have to demand justice. Justice came to me. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is not destroying your enemy. It's letting them live long enough to see you thrive above them.